show up at the smolt trap at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, we first take some environmental data. So that would be water temperature, air temperature, water depth, and weather. And we start getting all of our fish that we've dip netted out in the evening time and some in the morning calibrated for what we call a calibration bucket, because it's a volumetric count. So we'll fill up a bucket to a known level, and then we count every fish for the first 5 buckets, so that gives us an average. And so every bucket after that, we just assume that that average for the first 5 buckets is a good indicator of how many smolts we have in the subsequent buckets. And we prepare the tagging station, so we'll fill up the tagging station with water. We'll put a little bit of MS-222 into the anesthetic baths, which we slightly anesthetize the sockeye fry in preparation for tagging. And while we're counting and looking for marked recaptured fish, the taggers have already started by that time tagging the fish. And when we look at our fish, when we capture them, we look for the staple tags that we've applied previously, and we look at the different color combinations to tell us what day those smolts were released, and that will tell us how long it took to get here, and it will help us to determine when that divide between the early migrants and the late migrants occurs. So last year we found that May 13th was the date when the early migrants stopped pretty much and the late migrants began. And this information is really critical for understanding what the drivers are for sockeye abundance in the Skeena system. The Skeena system, supplies salmon for a large number of First Nations and other people as well. And 90% of those fish up to 90% can be from the Babine. So understanding the Babine smolt at migration and the numbers of smolts out migrating every year tells us roughly how well they're surviving in the lake. We also have fry survival data from Pinkett and Fulton. So if we see, from the fry to smolt survival rate, we can see how well they're surviving in the freshwater. And if we see a good number of smolts out migrating in a given year, but a poor return for that same brood year, then that would suggest that there's an ocean bottleneck. So it tells us a lot about where significant management concerns might be happening. So is it the freshwater? Is there something changing with Babine Lake and Limnological Lake and other lakes here? Or is it the ocean component? And then once we finish tagging the fish, we let them recover for about 3 hours. And then we transport them up until Limnological Lake, where we release them. We'll drive them up about 6 kilometers upstream, 6 to 8 kilometers upstream. And we slowly, gradually release the smolts as we drive at about a jogging speed towards Fort Babine. And the tagged smolts will disperse and mix with the untagged smolts. And then we recapture those here, and the proportion of tagged smolts to untagged smolts gives us a population estimate. And last year we had, I think, a 95% confidence interval for the early and lates of about 6 to 7%, which is pretty good.
Yeah, so we're looking at genetics, and we're going to hopefully be able to tell the difference between populations using some of the tissue from the fish, and we match it to the biosample data so that we can tell if certain populations are bigger or smaller generally, and that type of thing. So pretty simple, but it's important to get the samples right and keep everything matched up. So the early pulse comes from Limnological Lake and the north arm of Babine Lake, and the late pulse comes from the main arm of Babine Lake. So you don't know which populations necessarily are which fish, which is what we're trying to do with the genetics, but you do know that from tagging studies in the past that you've got these sort of big groups that come through at certain times.
As you can see, the current is really strong right now, so we're building a flyway to slow down so the fry can get through. We're trying to get them to go upstream. We're gonna be counting the fry on the front side of the baffles, like the upstream and the downstream of the baffles. And we're gonna also set fry traps on both sides too. We have to do different things at different times to be counting them.
We work hard to monitor the different changes that are happening in the watershed and what sort of things could be causing those changes and how we can do a better job at protecting the salmon and making sure they're here for many years to come. The salmon are really important to this area and the whole world, but the culture around the lake, Lake Babine Nation, and the communities that rely on these fish have been managing and conserving these species since time immemorial. And it's important that we continue to include the culture and the communities in how we do the management.
Today we've just completed a limnological survey of Limnological Lake. It's a lake that has not had any real limnological work done on it since the 50s or 60s, and that only involves zooplankton sampling as far as we know. And the reason why we're interested in conducting limnological surveys of Limnological Lake is to understand how it might affect upper and lower Babine River sockeye fry production. The lower and upper Babine River sockeye populations have experienced declines since actually the late 40s. There's been a decline. We're trying to understand why the upper and lower Babine River population has declined and how Limnological Lake may be contributing to that decline. When we first start our survey, we do a dissolved oxygen temperature profile of the lake, and that involves calibrating the DO meter, making sure our readings are accurate, and taking measurements every meter, and that tells us whether the lake's stratified or whether it's going through fall or spring turnover. Today, we didn't see any real stratification. So we got 9.6 degrees Celsius on the top surface, and we got 9.58 milligrams per liter of DO in the water.
I'm sorry, what was the temperature?
9.6. Something we did notice was below 6 meters, which was the thermocline, we started seeing declines in dissolved oxygen to as low as between 2 and 3 milligrams per liter, which is very low at the sediment interface. So it's a bit of a concern because Limnological Lake is shallow, and sockeye fry like to hide in the depths to avoid predation. Our Secchi depth is what we do next after DO profile.
So this is a Secchi disc, and it measures water transparency, and there's 0.5 meter intervals on these.
Yeah.
So we'll see how far this goes down, and before I can't see it.
We found a couple of weeks ago that the Secchi depth was usually between 4.5 to 5 meters deep. And our thermocline, when we started seeing rapid declines in dissolved oxygen, was at 6 meters deep. So these fry, if they're having to locate or distribute where there's suitable oxygen, are likely in a fairly bright zone, which might mean that they're a little more easy to capture for visual predators like rainbow trout, lake trout, burbot, and char, bull trout, and dolly varden. So a bit of a concern. And we also don't know why that dissolved oxygen is low, whether it's a natural situation where we have a lot of organic matter settling onto in the greater depths and being decomposed by aerobic bacteria. The aerobic bacteria consume oxygen and they break down that organic matter as it's their food source for them. And at the same time, they can deplete oxygen in the lower depths of the lake. That can be a natural situation, or it could be anthropogenic or caused by humans as a result of nutrient loading, such as sewage or nutrients coming off of farm fields and those kinds of things. And the next test we do is pH conductivity, And we have a pH connectivity meter where we first calibrate with standard solutions to make sure, again, our readings are accurate. And we do that at the surface. And then another measurement in the epilimnion when it's stratified, a measurement in the metalimnion, and a measurement in the hypolimnion. And when it's turning over as it is today, we simply go to those same depths we measured at when it was stratified to compare how pH and connectivity and also turbidity have changed. And we do a vertical plankton pull. So we drop a Wisconsin-style zooplankton net down to the bottom of the lake, and we rapidly pull it up so that we're sampling a vertical column of water, and that gives us the number of zooplankters per liter. And what we're really looking for with zooplankton pulls is how many of the preferred zooplankton species for sockeye fry are in the column. And if we see a few organisms that sockeye prefer to eat, like the large copepods and the large cladocerans like Daphnia, if we see few of those, we think that it's a good reason to maybe think that it's food limited. And if we see those species, but only small ones, less than 2 or 1.5 millimeters in length, that means that there may be not enough of them. So the larger ones that selectively get picked off by sockeye fry are not getting replaced. And there's what they call overcropping of zooplankton. So that would indicate a food limitation for sockeye fry production, and eventually small production. So fewer sockeye juveniles going out to the ocean to become adults. So we'd want to know from the nutrient component what trophic status the lake's in. Is it oligotrophic, mesotrophic, or eutrophic? And that tells us how productive we can expect that lake to be. And is it the proper trophic status or ideal nutrient regime, ideal phytoplankton amounts and zooplankton amounts and types that would promote greater sockeye production.
This fence here is what basically it started out as something we'd use to control how much salmon go through.
We got pink sockeye, sockeye jacks, coho, jack chinook, steelhead. We catch any of those, we just mark them down. But mostly we want to just keep the sockeye for the members. And the rest get marked down, and at the end of the day, they'll come and tally up the rest and then put it back in the books. When we're not taking fish food harvest, this is a trap that would fill up with fish coming through. Just be right here, sitting here, and you let the trap open as they come through. We have individual counters here keeping track how much fish coming through and everything. Jack, chinook, coho, pinks, whatever is coming through. And they try to keep that as they do different shifts, 8 hours. So 2 hours at a time, we have different people coming in and just taking shifts on how much fish we get through.
When the counting season is done, we'll pull everything up. You got these grates here. Those grates will then be ripped off the side of the fence here, and they'll be put outside the deck. And so you'll be having them all winter. They're like, this does not block the fish. So yeah, they do lift up the gates and they do lift up the grates. As members of the community come to pick up their sockeye here, but they'll go straight to the smokehouse, and they'll smoke a good portion of that. They'll half smoke them, and they'll start canning them for the winter, and they'll start making dried fish strips. That'll also last throughout the winter as well. So harvesting sockeye and getting it ready for winter time is definitely a big part of my life, and of course the members of the community and the elders that we look out for. And salmon harvesting is excellent. It's beautiful, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else other than collecting fish for the community and of course for myself as well.
What we're doing is we're tagging sockeye to identify run timing. So we have certain colors deployed on certain days, and we know from the day that was deployed to when we find it in a tributary how long it took to get to the tributary, and also which population is running through the fence at which time. So when we kind of get this information together and understand runtime a little more clearly, we can actually target harvesting on the enhanced Fulton and Pinkett fish and do less harvesting on the wild fish. So we can rebuild those wild populations that are not as strong as the enhanced populations. It's the whole point of this. It's actually a pilot study. We're just seeing how well it works.
Today we did water quality monitoring on Chazakwa Creek for the Community Economic Development Project. We measure different parameters of habitat quality in the streams for salmon spawning habitat. And so we measured alkalinity, hardness, and CO2 with test kits, and pH conductivity and dissolved oxygen with different meters. We also measure discharge in the creek using a swaffer, and we measured on 20 different locations across the creek. We also look at different habitat factors such as clarity, gradient, embeddedness, and substrate.
So today we are collecting adult sockeye samples as part of a number of different projects run by LBN Fisheries. For this work, we net or grab post-spawn individuals. So these are carcasses that have been born here, made their incredible journey out to the ocean and come all the way back, and succeeded in contributing to the next generation of fish. And they're dead on the shore, and we pick them up and take a small tissue sample for a genetic analysis. And then we also take some general characteristics of the fish, so length and weight. And then we cut in and take otoliths, which are small bones in the ears of the fish, and that helps us age them. So it tells us whether they've spent the average amount of time in the ocean, or a little more or a little less. Gathering this type of information from populations, especially wild populations like we have here, is so important for conservation because it allows us to make management decisions early enough to protect the stocks that need it the most. And it also gives us information on stocks that are doing well and that can be managed in a different way. So as we can identify the populations that need the most protection, this helps us ensure that these fish are going to come back year after year and be here to support generations into the future. We are really proud to work with the communities and work with local people on all of the projects that we do, and they are very proud in doing the work as well, knowing that everything they're doing during the day and throughout the season is contributing to sustaining these fish for their children and their grandchildren for years to come.
It brings First Nations and non-First Nations together to celebrate the smolt migration of sockeye from Babine Lake down the Babine River into the Skeena. It's a tremendous event. It brings people and cultures together so we can appreciate the resource and respect it, and also bring that awareness to the young kids that will be the future stewards of our lands and waters.
An event like this is so important to bring all of these communities together to one place, which doesn't happen very often.
I believe that salmon are important to us because they bring everyone together.
And it's really important to provide this opportunity to celebrate such an amazing migration. You know, when the adults come back, it's really obvious and everyone gets excited about these big fish coming back in their bright spawning colors, but this event is celebrating younger fish that are very small, and sometimes people don't even know that they're starting this incredible journey out to the ocean. And it's important for us to highlight the fact that they're vulnerable now too, and we have to remember at this life stage when they're small and just sort of starting their life, we have to take into account all the threats and sort of barriers that they have to overcome now as well.
I grew up around Babine Lake, and salmon is very important to me and my family.
And that's what's kept us together for thousands of years and continues to bring us together. So
I remember a couple years ago, I came here to go fishing, and the whole river looked like you could walk across it. There was so many salmon. I haven't seen that for a while now, and I would like that to be happening again.